on that note, David, we're so glad you're here today. It's really nice to talk to someone who has such a strong Indiana and Hoosier background as well. I'm from Indiana, and David has spent lots and lots of time there. And it's great because you are a graphic designer, you are an educator, you are a letterpress printer. You do really amazing, talented, skilled work, and you share your process, which I think is a really wonderful thing. It's part of what makes this letterpress community so strong, is that we're willing to share and show and demonstrate. So I appreciate it, and thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So hello from Denton, Texas. I'm glad you could all join us. So I'm a typographic artist, designer, and educator. I teach at North Texas in Denton, and I teach typography, graphic design, and book arts. And today what I was going to share with you, I posted on Instagram last night that I was going to be doing this talk, and asked if anybody had anything they wanted me to talk about. And I saw that some people were interested in seeing some of my wood type collection. I've been collecting since 2002. And so I'm gonna start by sharing some of my my favorite wood types. And then I'm going to do a short Photoshop demo demonstrating how I use Photoshop to compose my work digitally. I work both in analog and digital ways, and so I'm going to share a technique that I use to make my prints, or to see what my prints might look like before I actually go to the press. And then I'm going to finish up by talking about really influential teachers that I've had the good fortune to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and put on my headphones and switch to my iPhone and walk you over to the type cabinet in my living room.
And I will highlight David when he's in on his phone, so that it can be nice and big and easy to see.
Can you see me?
We can see you, and okay. You are now spotlighted, and we can hear you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so I just walked from my kitchen to my living room, and now I'm going to switch the view on my phone so you can see this type cabinet. So here's the cabinet that I have in my living room. I've got a little show card press, a 7x11 show card on the top of the cabinet. And this is my favorite brayer. I bought this brayer from Dave Churchman. This is a vintage speedball brayer. It came in their original box. This large ampersand, that's a 72 line ampersand that Bill Jones cut for me. And I get a lot of questions about the inks that I use. So I pulled a can. The manufacturer is Gans. And the line of inks is called Resolution. I like the Resolution inks because they set fairly quickly, which allows me to do overprinting pretty quickly. Here's an arrow cut by Jerry McCormick at Virgin Wood Type. And this is an arrow, this is an original design that I made to complement the Aldine expanded revival that I did for Virgin Wood Type back in 2000, 11, I think. And so now I'll just kind of go through, I pulled a few cases that have some of my favorite fonts in them. I'm going to start with another virgin wood type. This is another revival. It's a Gothic bold reverse stress. And I made some original catchphrases, so you can see the and, for, and the. So you can purchase those through Virgin Wood Type. And here's another favorite. This is this one's really special. It's in pretty poor condition. It's fragile. You can see that some of the characters are very dried and cracked. But what makes it so special is it was manufactured by Bill Stark & Co. And it's one of the only wood type American wood type manufacturers that stamped the foot of their type. So you can see the Bill Stark & Co. stamped into the foot of their type. And the other thing that makes this special is I talked to David Shields about this when I got it. And because it's got the stamp that says Bill Stark & Co., it can be dated precisely to 1853 to 1854, because that was the only year that the company was in operation under that name. Sometimes we like to print things other than letters, so I have a few cases of borders and ornaments. Some nice corner pieces. These Japanese corners are the model that one of my former students, Ben Dougal, did a revival of those for Scott Moore through Moore Wood Type. So you can purchase those from Scott Moore and Moore Wood Type. They're called the Dougal ornaments. I have a few different variations of the antique Tuscan. So this one's got an outline. And I can't remember if this one's stamped or not. Those are kind of wedged in there. I'll have to come back to those. This is an extremely rare typeface called Gothic Condensed Octagon Shade. This is a 12-line Arabian, I believe, is the name of that one. That one is a antique double outlined shade. The wood for that one is extremely heavy. I think it's the densest wood of any of the types that I have in my collection. This one's a fairly big one, 20 line. Takes 2 cases. Another fun outlined one with a bit of a shadow effect. I purchased this one from Dave Greer. Here's a case that's really full. There's 3 different fonts in here. I'm really fond of this title Etna by William H. Page. Another find from Dave Churchman in Indianapolis. Okay, so those are the highlights from the cabinet in my living room. So I'm gonna switch the view on my phone back to me, and I'm gonna walk over to my computer.
The walk will give us time to wipe the drool off of our chins, David. That is a stunning collection.
David, what was the typeface, the 72 line that you had in your press bed?
Oh, the type in the show card press was it's Aurora. It's an Italian font. So the type height is too tall for me to actually print on my presses without removing all the packing. And on the show card, I have to take the bed plate out.
Right, okay.
So I'm gonna go ahead and switch to my computer now.
Can everybody see me?
Yep, hi.
Hi. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to do a quick Photoshop demo. I'm going to show you how I add color to my type and how I work with it to design digitally. Now, the nice thing about Hamilton recording these is that if you're interested in this kind of thing, you can always come back to it and go through the demo along with me. All right, so I'm starting with some wood type that is actually Futura Bold Condensed. It's a 36 line. So it's 6 inches, and it was made for show card presses. So it has the slots cut into the feet. And this is the type that I've been using pretty extensively for my most recent 2 series of prints, the Angle Chase series and the Paraphrasing series. So when I proof the type, I almost always print with black. And then I scan it in at a high resolution. And once I have it in Photoshop, what I want to do is I want to select both of those layers of type. I have the H and the I as separate layers. And I change the blending mode from normal, which is how it is when I bring it into Photoshop. I change the blending mode from normal to multiply. And what that does is when I move these on top of each other, it simulates overprinting. So it looks like what it would look like if I printed one on top of the other. Because as we all know, letterpress inks are not 100% opaque. The other thing that I do is I found that changing the opacity of the layers allows me to get a better sense of how the inks are going to interact when they're overprinted. So I usually adjust the opacity from 100% down to somewhere around 92 to 93 or 94%. And for those of you who work in Photoshop, there's a fun little trick. If you click and drag on the name opacity, it looks like a slider. Okay, so now I have my type so that when they interact with one another, it simulates the overprinting. Now I want to add color. But what I want to do is I want to retain all of the details from the proof that I printed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this H, and I'm working on a MacBook. So I'm going to hold down the Option key, and I'm going to add a solid color adjustment layer. So I select this solid color adjustment layer while holding the Option key, and that will bring up this new layer window. And in the new layer window, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to click the Use Previous Layer to create clipping mask. That's going to apply the color just to the H and not anything below it. And I'm also going to change the blending mode of the adjustment layer from normal to screen. And this is going to apply the color to the type and retain all of the details. So it's going to look as though I printed it in whatever color I choose. So once I've done those two things, I'm going to click OK, and that will bring up my color picker. And from my color picker, I want to click on Color Libraries. And I work a lot with the process colors. And I want to choose Pantone Solid Uncoated as my color book because I print mostly on uncoated paper. So I'm going to choose Pantone Solid Uncoated. And then I'm going to drag these little white arrows up to the top and then click down twice. And that's where my process colors are. I'm going to click Process Cyan, U. The U stands for uncoated. I'm going to click OK. So now you can see that the color is applied to the letter form and all the details are still there. And then I'm going to do the same thing for my I. So this time I'm going to apply a color fill adjustment layer, a solid color fill adjustment layer, but I'm not going to hold down the Option key because sometimes I forget to do this. And I want you to see that there are other ways that you can accomplish the same thing. So I'm still applying a solid color adjustment layer. And I'm going to go back to my color libraries, make sure I'm selecting solid uncoated. And I usually, instead of picking the process magenta, I've actually found that this rhodamine red is a better approximation of the magenta that I print with. So I usually choose that instead of the process magenta. Click OK. And now you can see because it's a solid color fill, it's covering up the eye. So I can't see the eye below it. So all I have to do is to convert this solid color fill layer to an adjustment layer or a clipping mask is hold down the Option key and hover right over that line that separates the two layers and click on that line. And that turns it into a clipping mask. So now it's applied only to the layer below it. And then I want to make sure that I change the blending mode of the color fill layer from normal to screen. Now, if I need to move these letters around, say I need to kern the I closer to the H, I want to make sure that I select the I layer, and then I can move it over. And if I drag it over the I, you can actually see how the colors are going to interact with each other if I overprint them. And that's really all there is to it. You know, I could get crazy and start rotating these things around and duplicating them and masking them. But I'm going to save that for some future demos. And if there's enough interest, I could set up like an Instagram live session and do some of those kinds of demos.
That's really exciting. I love the idea, and I loved your demo. That's a really, really nice way to approximate it.
Thanks, Stephanie. Okay, so the final thing that I was asked to talk about from Mr. Jim Moran, he asked me to talk about influential teachers. And I've been really fortunate throughout my entire career in design and letterpress printing to work with just an incredible array of people. And I tend to think of everyone that I work with as a teacher. I don't reserve that title just for people that I've formally studied with, because I try to learn from everyone. And so my first influential teachers were my parents and my brothers and my grandparents. In college, I went to a small private Catholic school in Indianapolis for my undergraduate degree. And I worked with a woman named Janet Van Loan Trishman, who was so supportive of the work that I was doing. We didn't have an official graphic design program. I got my undergraduate degree. I have a BA in studio art. But Janet was a graphic designer, and I took a couple of graphic design classes with her. And she's the one who really encouraged me to pursue graduate studies, which I did at Indiana University in Bloomington. Also at Marian University, where I finished my BA in studio art, was a man named Mark Hall, who taught the history of printmaking, and invited me over to his house and showed me how he made relief blocks by gluing up end grain pieces of wood and then planing them down to type high, and then he would do wood engravings, and he would make very large wood engravings, which is sort of unusual. Then I had the good fortune in 2001, very early 2001, of meeting Jim Sheridan in Indianapolis. It was just after the History of Hat Show print book had come out, and he was doing a tour, and there was a gallery in downtown Indianapolis that was exhibiting some work. And I had no idea what letterpress printing was, but I went to this event, and I just knew as soon as I walked into that space and saw this work on the wall, it was so visceral, and I felt it in my bones that I had just discovered what I was put on this earth to do. So I made it my mission to talk to everyone in the room who even said the word letterpress, and I would ask them how I could learn. And Jim Sheridan was very supportive and encouraging, and because of that conversation and that interaction, I applied for graduate school at Indiana University in Bloomington, and I started in the fall of 2002, and my instructors were James Riedhar and Paul Brown. And I learned an amazing amount about design and typography and letterpress printing and life from working with those two men. Also at Indiana University was Jenny L. Shami and Martha McLeish. Both were very influential in my development as a designer and as an artist. I also worked with Brian Garvey at the IU Art Museum, now called the Ashkenazi Art Museum, and Jim Canary. I worked for the Lilly Library, making phase boxes, and I also took a class with Jim and learned, that was my first book art and bookbinding class, was with Jim Canary. I learned so much from Dave Churchman in Indianapolis. I became a regular fixture at his boutique de junk. I was there pretty much every Saturday from 1 o'clock until 4 or 5 o'clock whenever he closed. I met Amos Kennedy at Dave Churchman's, and he has always been an inspiration and an influential person in my life, though I never studied with him. When I worked at the book arts program at the University of Utah, we did bring him out for a workshop, and just a pleasure to spend time with him. A lot of people don't know this, but I actually spent about a week in 2004 or 5 working for Jen Farrell at Starshape Press in Chicago. So I had learned about Jen's work and was completely blown away. And though I'm talking about my influential teachers, in terms of letterpress education, I'm primarily self-taught. And I learned a lot by reaching out to people and asking if I could come spend time in their studio and ask them questions and learn from them. And Jen Farrell was initially, she was quite dubious, but I convinced her, I showed her some of my work, and I convinced her that I would love to spend some time learning how to print on a platen press from her. And in exchange, I did some work on her Vandercook SP15. And I did a lot of type sorting and type distribution. And she even let me proof some of the ornaments from Sky Shipley's Skyline Type Foundry, and added those to her specimen book. And then that's just influential teachers. In terms of colleagues, Selene Aubrey, at the manager at Hat Show Print currently, has been an incredibly influential and inspirational person in my life. I spent almost 8 years working at the University of Utah at the Book Arts program and Red Butte Press, and I learned an unbelievable amount from my colleagues there, especially Marnie Powers-Torrey and Chris McAfee. I took bookbinding with Chris McAfee.
On Return to the Beach, book your Memorial Day weekend at the Para.
I also learned a lot from some interactions with Tim Ely, an incredible book artist up in the Pacific Northwest. Other colleagues that I need to shout out as influential in terms of what I've learned from them: Aaron Beckloff and Scott Moore, Jerry McCormick and Bill Jones, David Shields, Vita Sacic, Dafi Kuna, Gloria Condrup, Ned Drew, Brad Bartlett at Art Center College of Design, Emily McVarish, an incredible book artist, letterpress printer, typographer, type historian, Martin Vineski and Rick Valicenti. And then many of my students are also, I think of my students as teachers. I learned so much from my students as well. So some students that I feel like I should shout out: Phaedra Charles, Matt Griffin, Alexander Landerman, and Mia Lynn. All right. So that's all I had planned. And I'd love to hear if you have questions or if you just want to chat. Let's get on with it.
That was great, David. Thank you. I do want to say how much information was shared in half an hour is amazing. So thank you for that first.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
And
Thanks,
this is,
What are you working on right now?
I'm working on a new series. So I just posted some sketches to my Instagram account. I post a lot of my process there. I'm really interested in this poetic technique called Enjambment. And so I'm exploring how I can apply that kind of thought process to the work that I'm doing, where I'm masking type. For those of you who don't know, in 2012, I came across this technique that I call isotype printing. It's isotype is I realize that it's an appropriated term, but I use it as a portmanteau of the word isolate and type. And the technique where I'm using a custom packing on my cylinder presses in conjunction with a mask that allows me to safely and sustainably addition print wood type and other relief forms. So I'm not causing any sort of variable pressure, and it allows me to print my wood type without causing any damage to it. So I'm working on a new series for a show in Southern California. And I wrote a grant last year and got funding to purchase a glowforge laser cutter. So I have that in one of the spare bedrooms in my house, and I'm going to be experimenting with using the laser cutter to make more complex masks and see how far I can push this isotype technique.
That's really cool, and I love that you have a bedroom dedicated to your glowforge.
It gets its own blanket.
Well, I mean, there is a futon in there and some other furniture, so it's not just the glowforge room. But my wife and I live in a 4-bedroom house, and we don't have kids or pets, so we each have our own studio spaces in the house, and then we also have that extra bedroom. So the glowforge is on a rolling table in the guest bedroom.
I don't know. I'm thinking you have a themed Airbnb thing going on here.
I know, that's just what I was thinking, Amy.
Yeah.
Airbnb experience.
Yes.
Sign up.
I'll bring my own mask.
Yeah.
I was just gonna Google David Wolske and find your address.
Yeah, right.
Hey, who took my type?
David, I'm not familiar with what a glowforge is. What is that?
It's a consumer level laser cutter. So it's not as robust as the larger Epsons or epilogue laser cutters rather.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still figuring it out. It has some quirks about it that I think it was made to make it easier for non-designers to use, and that tends to make it more difficult for designers to use. So I'm still figuring out how it works.
I see. Thank you.
David, what kind of press do you do most of your work on, and where do you keep your press?
So my main press is a Vandercook SP15, which I bought from the original owner in 2003. And it's just absolutely mint. It came with the original dust cover. It came with a folder full of the salesman's business card and brochures for other presses that the print shop was considering. So that's my main press. I bought a Vandercook number 4 from Ben Jones last year. And then I also have 2 Chandler and Price pilot presses. I have a 14 by 22 linoscribe, a 7 by 11 linoscribe, and 4 7 by 11 show card presses. I used the smaller show card presses for in-class workshops. I have a cart that I put them all on.
And where are all those located?
Yes, where?
Some are in my office in the house, but most of them are in the garage. I have a 2-car garage that everything, I would show you the garage, except I'm not sure if my Wi-Fi will hold up. And everything is kind of pushed to the side because this is tornado season in North Texas.
Oh, sure.
And so almost on a weekly basis, I have to pull the car in to avoid like golf ball or baseball size hail.
Yikes.
Yeah. They don't tell you about that when you're considering moving to Texas.
Hey, David, have you bought any new type recently other than like the Virgin stuff?
Not really. For many years, I was spending almost all of my money on type acquisition. But at this point, I've stopped for the most part because I really only use 3 or 4 fonts. I'm more interested in experimenting with these simple basic shapes and seeing what I'm capable of doing creatively with those. Even though I love the old, the beautifully ornamented types, they're just, it's so, they have this certain connotation, and people tend to associate certain things when they see those typefaces. And I'm not particularly interested in incorporating that into the work that I'm currently doing.
Yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to open a type case in my shop and feel the same having seen yours. I mean, that drawer of borders, and it was an amazing collection. And
Just send it to me. I'll take it.
Oh man, that was awesome. Thanks for sharing all that with us.
Yeah.
David, I wanted to thank you for talking about all your teachers and influencers, because it just put such a smile on my face to go down the memory lane of all those influencers that have, so many of them that have influenced all of us in Letterpress.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
thank you for that.
And there's so many of the faces that I can see now that belong on that list. It was just, that was the short list that I threw together right before the talk.
Dave, can you tell me about meeting Amos and Jen? Those people they're heroes to me, and they're so strong in their personality. Can you tell the story of how you met them exactly?
Amos, I met, I had known of Amos's work because he had just left Indiana University right before I started graduate school, but we had never personally interacted until one weekend. I was at Dave Churchman's warehouse, and I was usually the first person there and the last to leave. And I was there almost every week. And so anytime he got anything new in, I was usually the first person to see it. And he had just gotten in an entire cabinet of wood type from a dealer in Chicago. And I saw it. I was the first person to see it. And I asked him how much it would cost to purchase the entire cabinet. And he kept blowing me off. He kept saying he had to go through all of it and count up everything that was in there before he could give me a price. And so week after week, I came back and I would ask him, and he'd just say, "Quit bothering me about it. I'll get to it when I get to it." And then one week I was there and I had just walked out of that room looking at that cabinet and was going to bug him about it again. And Amos walks through the door, and as soon as he does, he pulls out this roll of bills, flush from a poster sale, and he said, "I'm here to buy all your wood type."
Oh, Amos!
And of course, Amos knew exactly where the wood type room was, so he beelined it to the wood type room, and I hear him from the back of the room, "Hey, where'd this cabinet come from? How much to ship it down to Alabama?" And as soon as he left, I said, "Now, Dave, you know I was the first person to ask you about that. You cannot tell it to him before letting me make you an offer." So that was my first in-person meeting with Amos.
Nice.
We talked about, people that we knew in common. My first meeting with Jen was, I met her, I introduced myself via email, and then I told her that one of my best friends in the world actually has a studio a block over from her, and I used to visit him all the time. And so I asked if I could stop by one week when I was visiting, and she was like, "Yeah, okay, we'll see. Just give me a heads up before you show up." So I sent her a very nice, polite email and told her that I was going to be visiting, and asked if there was a good time to come by. And I think she sort of reluctantly said, "Okay, you can stop by." And so I brought my whole portfolio with me, and she very generously spent about an hour looking at my work and talking to me about printing. And so our relationship developed from there.
Nice.
And we actually have a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
Tom Walker wants to know, how open to experimentation on press are you? Seems like some of your technique of working out placement and color in software can get pretty tight, much like commercial production. Does this just depend on the series or the project?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tom. I tend to have two modes that I work in. Sometimes I'm really tight and technical, and I don't want surprises on the press. And that's usually when I'm making work for a show, and I have deadlines. I don't really have time for mistakes or experimentation in those circumstances. But after I finish an edition like that, I have this real need to experiment. And so the other mode that I work in is I enter into the studio with a completely open mind, and I just pick something that appeals to me, and I ink it up and I print it, and then I think about it like jazz improvisation. I just start responding to the interactions of color and negative space and contrast of size and weight and orientation. And so there's a part of me that really needs that. And that's where I do most of my learning, is in that kind of work mode where I don't have any preconceived idea of what I'm trying to accomplish. It's really just about the experience. Great question.
That might actually.
Have you ever felt a conflict between those two ways of working, or has it always been just a natural back and forth?
I have felt the conflict. It was much earlier. So I was talking to Paul Brown last night actually, we had some virtual cocktails, and I realized while we were talking that this year is the 15th anniversary since I graduated from graduate school, and 18 years since I started graduate school. And when I first started graduate school, I had previously been working full-time as a web designer. And so I came into Letterpress with this pixel perfect idea of how design should work. And it served me quite well because while I was learning to print, those were my standards. I learned how to print with extreme precision. But once I felt like I had developed my technique and my skills to a certain point, I realized that there was no joy in reproducing what I had already designed. And so at that point, that was about the halfway point into grad school. I made a conscious decision to really unlearn everything that I had previously been learning about design. And I trained myself to work spontaneously. And I have this thing that I do where if I'm working, whether I'm working on my computer or in the studio, if I hear the voice in my head say, oops, I know now to stop and spend a few minutes evaluating what just happened, because I've discovered that 9 times out of 10, it's far more interesting than what I had planned. And so that becomes a part of the work going forward. So those two ways of working, they really do inform each other for me. And I need both of them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And actually, Vita Sachek asks, I'm interested in your approach. What text generation techniques are you thinking? I'm just curious. She admires your practice.
Vita, I actually don't think a whole lot about words. That's one of the things I admire about your work. At this point, I'm really more interested in exploring the formal components of letter forms and words. So most of the work is very abstract. And so rather than thinking about a word when I'm printing, I'm usually thinking about the kind of shape and the line weight and the color and the position. It's after the work is done, or sometimes in the process of developing a new series, I am very thoughtful about what I title the work. A lot of the work is a response to language, mechanics, and syntax. So I mentioned that the new series that I'm working on now is going to be called Enjambment, and that's a poetic technique. So those are things that I think about that sort of create the concept. They drive the conceptual part of the work, and then the formal technical part of the work is really more of a response to what I'm seeing. Marnie, so Marnie asked if I'm thinking about enjambment in terms of flat sheets or in terms of page breaks or turning the page. That's a great question. I've been thinking a lot recently because I started teaching book arts formally last fall. That was my first time teaching book arts class by myself. So I've been thinking a lot about 3-dimensionality in terms of what I'm making. So that will definitely play a part. The current series that I'm working on will probably continue to be flat prints because they're for a show specifically. But it will definitely, the three-dimensionality of a book or a folded sheet is something that's constantly on my mind. Thanks for the question. Any others?
Hey, David.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you host any open houses or things to non-students.
I haven't so far, but I mentioned earlier that if there was enough interest, I was thinking about doing an Instagram live session. I'll have to figure out how to coordinate the technology, but I would love to do that for anybody who is interested.
Yeah, this was asked earlier. What resolution do you scan your pieces in at?
I usually scan at multiple resolutions. I do very high resolution scans around usually 900 DPI. And then I also do 300 DPI resolution scans. The 900 DPI resolution scans allow me to scale much bigger, and I've had a couple of commercial commissions that really necessitated working at a much larger scale than the type would allow. So I had to scan them very high. And that it takes up more space on my hard drives, but it's far more flexible. So I think about the building an archive of materials while I'm doing this. And so scanning them at a very high resolution, it takes longer, but I have more options in the future for how I can work with that archive material.
That's great. So we are coming up on our hour, and I know that we could ask you questions and chat with you all day, but you know what, we can keep it open a little bit longer, but I will do a little wrap it up. That way, if people have other meetings and other things, and David, also to respect your time, that you don't have to stay on with us forever. So I do want to remind everyone, our next ham hang is Wednesday, May 20th at 6 p.m. Central with Richard Kegler and James Grieshopper of P22. I'll put a link to all these upcoming ham hangs in the chat window. That way you guys can plan to join us. And our next Friday one is May 22nd at 12 p.m. Central Time with Macy Chadwick of In Cahoots Press and Residency. The really wonderful thing about all of these is we get to invite our friends to tell us more about what they're doing and what they're up to, and share their studios. So I want to say, please plan to join us for more. David, thank you. That was a really, really, really wonderful hour of seeing what you do and your collection. So thank you so much.